I would have caregivers or staff members calling me up and say, wow, Dr. Lewis, my wife or my grandmother is now talking about things or doing things that she hasn't done in a long time. We start looking at the data, and lo and behold, we get clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. I mean, it was literally one of those moments in my life where I wanted to rip off my shirt and run around the block.
Hey everyone, Derrick Hines here. Welcome to the podcast where I'll share with you the patterns, insights, research, and technologies that we use in my own pain and performance practice to help people improve their health, speed their healing, and increase their longevity. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. Good day, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Pain and Performance Podcast. This is back to one of the exciting parts of this is bringing world experts on the show. So I know a lot of you have enjoyed, and I've enjoyed making our kind of little mini in-between episodes of bite-sized informations. This is a conversation with Dr. John Lewis, brilliant researcher, PhD, who has spent a lot of time studying Alzheimer's, MS, and nutritional compounding to address those. And some of the studies that we talk about on this episode are things that I want my family to hear and know. We do get a bit into the weeds, and if you are not familiar with certain forms of research and inflammation, stick with us because we definitely talk about what this means for the average person who's trying to prevent these issues, who's trying to treat these issues. This was definitely one of those episodes that I think will end up on the most listened to list because it gives such great information of what current studies we have that we can use to impact these diseases in a lot of different mechanisms, but also some future opportunities for us to continue to create better outcomes in a lot of these really challenging diseases. So I think if you value your brain, if you value your body, this is a great episode to understand what creating a healthier environment can do and what the studies actually show. So please enjoy this fantastic episode with Dr. John Lewis. All right, Dr. John Lewis, welcome to the Pain and Performance Podcast, man.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
So before we dive in, take me really, give me the quick dinner version of your history getting to this point.
I'll do my best to be quick. It started out as played sports my whole life growing up. Then in college, I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding. Didn't do that for many years. I decided pretty quickly early on I was not going to do drugs. I didn't have an interest in taking those long-term risks. And also I couldn't see a pathway to making a living as a bodybuilder. I know some people do it, but there's one Arnold Schwarzenegger and then there's everybody else. So
right.
It didn't appeal to me on a financial prospects level. But what bodybuilding did for me was it shifted my mindset about food. And I went from most Americans' attitude where you just eat for taste, you're hungry, you want to eat something that you like, that you enjoy, and you just keep going, right? That's the typical American attitude. But for bodybuilding, of course, you have to have deadlines and you set goals for yourself, mostly related to your percent body fat. And so you have to be very, I call it professional about how you eat. And so it definitely is something that I credit as a shift for me early in my life, in my 20s. And then after I got out of bodybuilding, although I still weight train, that's my preferred exercise training. I still love training like a bodybuilder. I just don't get on a stage anymore in my bikini, but
come on, Doc.
But the next really significant leap, not only in my career, but my life, was meeting a gentleman by the name of Dr. Reg McDaniel about 20 years ago. And Dr. Reg, I'd already started my research career, so it was a bit after that. So I was already doing running clinical trials in nutrition, dietary supplements, and exercise training at the University of Miami Medical School. And so I meet this gentleman, Dr. McDaniel, and he's a pathologist by training, but he hasn't practiced pathology for about 20 years at that point. And he's telling me about basically practicing nutrition using something called aloe polysaccharides, these complex sugars from aloe vera. And he's telling me this story, and you know how you tell your dog something and kind of looks at you, kind of turns his head, he gives you that kind of, what are you saying? And so Reg is telling me about sugars from aloe vera, and I'm like, what in God's name is this man talking about? Of course, you think of aloe vera for what? Sunburn, right?
Right.
You get a sunburn, you have a cut on your skin. Your grandmother told you, put some aloe vera gel on it and it'll get better in a few days. And that's certainly still true today. But Reg is telling me about all these incredible stories around different types of viruses, cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration, genetic defects in children, reversing dwarfism in children, restoring eyesight. I mean, just all these incredible stories. And I'm like, wow, it's just blowing me away that I'm like, this plant that I thought of just for sunburns is actually way more than that. And so as he's just like filling me with all of this information and really giving me like this crash course in these complex sugars, I just was like, wow, this is incredible. And so the opportunity arose for us to run a clinical trial, actually two, in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease and people with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Thanks to Reg being on stage at a conference, he was giving a lecture about some work he was doing in people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's with these polysaccharides. And there happened to be a lady in the audience listening, and she and her husband had lost 4 family members to Alzheimer's. They formed a relationship with Reg, and they were very excited and motivated about his work up to that point. And they said, we have money that we were planning to donate to research. What your story is exactly the kind of place we would love to donate to. Reg didn't, at that time, he was not affiliated with any university or any research institution. So I happened to be in the right place at the right time, being a faculty member at the University of Miami. And he calls me up and he says, John, we have an opportunity to run this study with the polysaccharides. It just has to be in Alzheimer's disease as per the wishes of the donors. And I'm like, hey, that's great. We're here in South Florida, obviously lots of elderly people, and unfortunately lots of those folks with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So that's kind of the what led me down this path to running these studies and publishing all these data, creating a dietary supplement that I actually, my most significant, or I should say our most significant discoveries in that Alzheimer's study was I didn't know it at the time, was the beginning of the end of my academic career, because we could not get any more funding, or I could not, because I was the one submitting the applications to NIH and Alzheimer's Association. I could not get any more funding to extend this line of research, and we can talk about the particulars. And so it ended up driving me out of academics. It's now going on 9 years I've been out of academics full time, and now in the dietary supplement world, going around being the myth-busting man about sugar. If you want to talk about that a little bit more, we can as well. But that's my mission, to help people with these polysaccharides from aloe vera, and rice bran happens to be the other one. And that's what I've been doing for the better part of the last 20 years of my life, either in the academic research setting and now in the business world. But just taking every opportunity, and I'm grateful for the time you and I are sharing today to tell this story, to give people more details about what they can utilize from these two incredible plants from Mother Nature that I would put up against anything else in the natural world. The only other one that I would maybe put in the same class would be curcumin. But just in our lab alone from the University of Miami, the work that we've published is just astounding. And it's just such incredible potential to help people heal that, again, is unlike most anything else I'm aware of in Mother Nature. So that's why I'm here today. That's not a very quick story.
I appreciate that. It's whenever I started digging into, I guess, some of the effects in the studies, it did hit me. I was like, I wonder if starting with the most challenging effects of Alzheimer's and MS was on purpose. Is that somewhere that you think y'all would have looked to start had you not been, influenced? I mean, that's a challenging place to really try and show an effect. You can have something that works amazingly well, but man, y'all are starting on Mount Everest almost.
We did, and I'll tell you why. Because again, the work that Reg had done. So this man started out as a pathologist 40 years ago. He was introduced to this aloe, a similar material from Mother Nature, but different product. And he had, I think it was 8 or 10 guys that had HIV at that time. And before antiretroviral medication, if you got HIV, it was basically a death sentence for most people. So these guys were taking this aloe product. They had no viral load, and their CD4 cells were normal. Total conventional medical heresy. Like, how do you explain that? And Reg, I guess, initially thought he was being pranked. He just took it as a joke. Why are you coming to me? Like, I don't know anything about nutrition. But fortunately, they would not take no for an answer. And so it eventually led him to practicing nutrition because of all these discoveries that he and his colleagues, mostly veterinarians actually from Texas A&M, he couldn't get any of his physician friends interested. But his veterinarian friends got very interested. So they started looking at all these different conditions, again, different types of viruses, HIV, hepatitis, many different types of cancers. And then it just spread from there. And now, 40 years later, he has over 800 documented health challenges. Let's not call them diseases and disorders, but health challenges that have responded very favorably and successfully to these polysaccharides. And so let's talk about cancer just for a second.
Yep.
And please, no one leave this conversation and say, well, Lewis said you could use nutrition to treat disease. I'm not saying that at all. That's the pharmacological model, where you take a chemical and then you alter a metabolic pathway to treat a symptom of a disease. That's the pharmacological model. As you know, the nutritional model says you provide the raw materials to the body that the genes interpret to guide the cells and how to function properly. And then the body's inherent intelligence repairs and restores itself to homeostasis. That's the nutritional model. So please, no one put words in my mouth and say that I said we could use nutrition to treat disease. I'm not saying that. But in cancer patients, he went to a hospice, and I actually talked about this. I was given the opportunity to do a TEDx Miami talk a few years ago, and I had a slide from one of the patients there. He went to a hospice for cancer patients, and we all know hospice is your last step before the funeral home. So most of these people had already had your typical surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the whole conventional spectrum of treatment, and then they're still sent to die. And this one man in particular had metastatic disease from his liver. And so again, he had had every conventional treatment, sent to hospice to die. Reg got into this facility and started asking people if they were interested in trying. And why wouldn't you at that point, right? You're on the last leg anyway, supposedly. And this gentleman went from all that treatment, all that butchering from a medical perspective, to a year later, no cancer and leaving hospice. And up until like the last time I asked Reg about this guy was sometime, I don't think it was last year. I think it was end of 24. So it's been a little over a year ago. I need to actually ask him again. That guy was still alive. A quarter of a century later, after being given up for dead, he was still alive because of giving his body the nutrition and the materials that it needs to function properly. So you're absolutely right. We started out on Mount Everest with moderate to severe severity of Alzheimer's because of all this incredible work that Reg and his colleagues had done prior to that, where the outsider, you say, wow, that's a miracle. But there's nothing miraculous about it. It's enabling the bioengineering of life when you provide the proper materials to allow the cells to do that.
It's not to soapbox this, but like our body is incredible at adapting to its environment. It's always doing that. It's just, what is it adapting to? What environment is it adapting to? When we start to change that environment, it makes different adaptations. It's incredible to see some of these things. And it's like, if you change the environment, you change the adaptive response. And like, that's you described it so eloquently, of like the medical model of like, no, like let's go in and like we're going straight to this one thing, versus let's change the environment so that the body does the work for us in a sense. Just so people kind of understand, what is a polysaccharide? Let's kind of break that down just so everybody knows a little bit of what we're talking about. And then I do have some questions about some of the studies. I want to hear the stories behind some of that stuff, but let's lay some groundwork for the listeners.
Well, let's break this myth. I'll do it in the context of, let's break this myth around the word sugar, because in my opinion, sugar is the most misused word in all of nutritional science, if not all of health and wellness. First of all, when people are running around out there, and a lot of them are doing it, saying all sugar is bad for you, that's a not factually correct statement, and I'll tell you why. Because not all sugars are created equally. There are, by definition, by biochemistry, four types of sugars. Monosaccharides, one molecule of sugar like high fructose corn syrup. Disaccharides, two molecules of sugar like sucrose, white table sugar. Oligosaccharides, 8 to 10 molecules of sugar, and most commonly in something like breast milk, which obviously the baby needs to get from its mother to grow and develop. And then finally, polysaccharides, literally thousands of molecules of sugar attached together by these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. They are literally like 5D structures. You cannot draw them on a piece of paper. They're so complex in that library of coded information. And these that we've studied from aloe vera and rice bran, again, I would put up against anything else out there other than maybe curcumin for their potential healing effect, whatever you want to call it. So the idea that all sugar is bad for us is a total, at best, you're being ignorant, and at worst, you're just intellectually dishonest, because that's not true. And I have, again, all this research that we've done, and Reg and other people that have been in our group together have conducted. So I just would ask people to be mindful of that word, because it needs to be put in proper context. So a polysaccharide is just simply a very complex sugar. It's a synonym to saccharide, sugar, carbohydrate. They all mean the same thing, but there's something. Now here's where it is a little bit opinionated, or maybe not so factually determined. In fact, it's not factually determined. Let's call it my hypothesis, that there is something beyond biochemistry about these two particular sugars that we've studied from aloe vera and rice bran. And I believe, and again, I hope to prove this at some point in my own path of discovery, let's call it, but I believe there's something on the physics level about these particular sugars, because they just, there are lots of polysaccharides in nature, whether they come from mushrooms or seaweed or vegetables or grains. I mean, there are lots of plants that have polysaccharides, but what is it about these two plants in particular that are so special and so dynamic? That's what I can't explain. And so that's why I think it's actually more than biochemistry. I think it's something at the physics level.
Explain that a little bit. What do you think's going on there?
I think it's something about resonance. I think there's a resonance with aloe vera and rice bran that is so complementary or so aligned with our own resonance. And maybe it's even down to specific cells, especially the ones in the immune system, where it does just such incredible work. So that's what I hope to prove. That's my working theory right now. I can't prove it because I don't have the funding in my company yet to do those kinds of studies to try to get down that road of information, but that's my working hypothesis right now.
Interesting. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Levin with like the bioelectrics?
Sounds vaguely familiar.
His whole lab is that there's an electrical signal of cells, and when they're in that electrical signal, that they respond with how they've been like designed to respond. And so what he's studying a lot is like, if we don't know anything about like what's wrong with the cells or any of that stuff, if we just put the electrical imprint on that we know is like the one for growth or the one for inflammation, then the cells know what to do. He was like, I don't know what components they're pulling in. I don't know what they're changing. I know if I give them this imprint, they respond in the way that they are deeply designed to respond. Wow. It's a very interesting navigation. My brain goes all kind of research ways of like, can we use that information? They're using it to regrow parts and stuff. I'm like, I just want to turn off like abnormal cell function that are sending pain signals. Like that sounds like the easiest imprint. What are normal cells? Yes, that's very interesting. So when we go down that pathway, let's break apart this first Alzheimer's study that y'all did. Let's go ahead and set the stage for us on that. What was the participants? Just kind of take us through that first Alzheimer's study, and then I'll throw some questions at you.
Sure. So the design for that study was going to be a 1-year intervention. We had about $150,000, thanks to the generosity of this family, we had about $150,000 to run the study, which, again, if you're outside academics, you may say, wow, that's a ton of money. But actually, when you combine it, or when you compare it to Big Pharma's research, it's like a drop in the bucket. And clinical trials is they are the most expensive studies to run. They're very, very intensive in terms of personnel costs and what you're doing in terms of assessing biomarkers, et cetera. So it's not exactly a lot of money, but nonetheless, as I mentioned, we wanted to investigate the effects of this formula on people with moderate to severe severity of Alzheimer's disease, which is the most tragic and the worst severity of this disease that also Big Pharma doesn't really care much about studying at this point. They view those folks as kind of a waste. They also had to be diagnosed at least for 1 year, and they had to be diagnosed with the psychiatrist and the neuropsychologist. So, we wanted to make sure that we were studying really sick people that were normally not eligible for any of the other studies, because these people were always looking, as you can imagine, not the person diagnosed him or herself, but the caregiver was always looking for some opportunity to help their loved one. And we didn't change anything else. It was a very simple design in the fact that we didn't really have too many exclusions or inclusions. It was just made it very simple. Diagnosed for 1 year at the moderate to severe severity level. We didn't change their drugs, of course, their medications. We didn't change their diet. We didn't exercise them. We didn't socialize them. We didn't change any other variable. We just said, here, take our dietary supplement every day. And then we collected neurocognitive functioning at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then we drew their blood at baseline and 12 months because we had, again, based on a lot of Reg's prior work, we had very strong intuition or suspicion that we want to find lots of links between what was happening at the cognitive, clinical, practical level, and then what was going on in the blood in terms of immune markers, different subsets of the immune system, and different inflammatory markers. So that was the basic design of our study.
And so over that year, they were taking the aloe polysaccharide.
Correct.
Was there the dosing on that? Was that kind of predetermined from previous studies? How did the dosing come about?
Yes, so we decided based on, again, a lot of the work that we had done with these advanced neurodegenerative conditions, with advanced cancer patients, advanced heart disease, that we needed to give a fairly good dose of the polysaccharides. So it turned out to be 4 teaspoons, roughly 2.5 grams per day. So you're talking, roughly 10 grams of material per day of the dietary supplement. And we did it initially in the powder form because, as you know, people with dementia, about 30% of them have issues swallowing. So we didn't want to give a capsule or a tablet. We wanted to make it easy so that they could mix it, in smoothies or yogurt or oatmeal, applesauce, mashed potatoes, whatever.
So let's go through the change over the 12-month.
Well, as you can imagine, because of how this disease is so impactful on the brain and its functioning, we were most excited about the cognitive functioning data. And the ADAS-Cog, that is considered, this is not my opinion, the ADAS-Cog is considered to be the standard for assessing cognitive function, especially in people with any form of dementia. So we were like, we were rubbing our hands saying, yeah, let's see what this information looks like. And it was interesting because as we were running the study, and as you can imagine, we had 34 people in the study for a 1-year intervention. That took us a long time to run that study. It took us about 2.5 years to run it. So this was not a quick process. Yeah. And we were getting really nice anecdotal responses as we were conducting this study. Like I would have caregivers or staff members calling me up and say, wow, Dr. Lewis, like my wife or my grandmother is now talking about things or doing things that she hasn't done in a long time. So as we were getting close to the end of the study and getting ready to run the stats, I felt confident that we were going to show something. And so we start looking at the data, and lo and behold, we get clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. It just literally one of those moments in my life where I wanted to rip off my shirt and, run around the block, because it was just such an exciting finding. And it was just validation and reward for what we had put into it, all this hard work. And the fact that it validated all these anecdotal reports we were getting along the way. So for us, that was just mind blowing. And you can compare that to anything in the scientific literature, as we like to say today, fact check me, right? So I always like to tell folks, go to PubMed, do your own literature search. If you can find something else out there that shows that kind of an effect, that kind of finding, I want to know about it, because I haven't found it yet. And that first paper was published in 2013. But You can compare that to the 5 FDA approved drugs for dementia. They don't do anything, as you know. You can compare that to any kind of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, red light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, homeopathy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm not aware of anything else that shows that kind of an effect over a 12-month period like our dietary supplement did. I mean, it was just mind-boggling. And we've published 4 papers from this study, and it's the only paper in my career of over 100. I think I have about 180 something papers at this point. It's the one time in my career we submitted that paper for publication, and I got a call from Dr. Perry, the editor of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, shortly after that. And he goes, "Wow, Dr. Lewis, this paper's amazing. I'm going to recommend we publish your paper as soon as I get back the reviews from the reviewers." He said he didn't see anything else like that at that point in terms of those kinds of effects as well. And so that was the one and only time that ever happened. But how do you explain that clinical practical finding, right? Like there's got to be something going on at the cellular level as a foundation to say, okay, how did this clinical change occur? So again, as I mentioned, we looked at a lot of different subsets of the immune system and inflammatory markers. Well, first of all, we showed a really nice statistically significant improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio over that 12-month period. So that's a ratio that's very important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's disease. That's your ratio of your helper cells to your cytotoxic cells. Again, a very important finding, probably the first time ever showed that in Alzheimer's disease. Second, we showed in 2 very important proteins that are commonly looked at for chronic inflammation, tumor necrosis factor alpha and vascular endothelial growth factor. Again, those are classically looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first one to publish that lowering effect of both of those proteins over that 12-month period. And then finally, we showed a 286% increase in CD14 cells. CD14 cells are a type of adult stem cell. They have been shown in other research, not at our lab at the University of Miami, but in other research, that they can actually turn into neurons. So that was over that 12-month period, a 286% increase in adult stem cell production. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention these people on average were 79.9 years of age. And they didn't just have Alzheimer's, right? They had diabetes, they had depression, they had different forms of heart disease, very, very dominant type of patient population, and at a pretty advanced stage. And we showed all those effects in that first paper. I mean, it was just, for me, it was like, and it still is, even after all these years, it was the height of my academic career in terms of, scientific discoveries, not only to make discoveries but actually, like to your point earlier about being practical and able to help people. I mean, who cares if this is in mice or rats or guinea pigs? If it doesn't translate to humans, what's the value to us? But this is actually in human clinical data that we've got this kind of information that we can actually help people.
I feel like that practicality kind of comes from a little bit of the bodybuilding world. I was listening to Dorian Yates recently, and he's like, I don't care what the research says. If I take it in the gym and it doesn't work, you can show me the paper all you want. I'm like, right, exactly. That's great. I still have to look at this guy or this girl. Exactly. So look, we want the science. I want the science. I want to know, because the science gives us how do we level up, right? How do we take something that's working and optimize it to a degree? Do you think that this is the stacking effect? Because there are other things that reduce inflammatory markers. There are other things that improve CD4 and CD8 in isolation. I haven't really looked deeply at CD14 monocyte increase, but I'm like, there are other things that do these individual things. But do you think the big effect of this is that it kind of checks multiple boxes that kind of creates this compound effect that is to the improvement in these cases?
No question about it. And that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly how Reg and I have always approached it. As you know, the cells, their first nutrient is oxygen. And then after that, they need roughly 40 different things to function properly, at least. And so we were not trying to look at a magic bullet. I mean, it would have been very easy for us just to have said, here, we're only going to give you the aloe and not include the rice bran and the flaxseed and the lecithin and the diascoria and the tart cherry and the IP6 and all these other things, we were coming up with we felt like was a very foundational formula that had nutrients and phytonutrients in it that are commonly not consumed in the modern diet, if at all. I mean, certainly, I don't know about you, we have aloe vera growing in our backyard here in Miami, but I'm not out there every day, snipping leaves and sucking the gel down. Number one, it tastes nasty, and number two, it's 99 point something percent water anyway, so I could never drink enough of the gel to get a concentrated amount of the polysaccharides that I need for a therapeutic effect. So yes, absolutely. I mean, this is all about providing all of these different materials at the same time that our genes interpret and say, yes, that's exactly what we need to make our cells function properly.
Yeah. The absorption of this polysaccharide, is there a reason that it's split up into 4 doses? Like, maybe you have studies on this, maybe you don't, but like, could you have done 2 doses and what did?
Absolutely. So, back in those days, I mean, I know that typical dietary recommendation has definitely shifted in the last 10, 15 years, where now people are looking at, time restricted eating is now so much more of a thing than it was even 10 years ago. So what we were thinking back in those days, especially for an older person where, you're trying to keep them on some sort of a consistent daily schedule. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then maybe bedtime snack. Like that was our paradigm back then. But absolutely. I mean, I personally take it twice a day. I wake up in the morning, I'm fasted, of course, I'm on an empty stomach. I take all of my supplements. And then my second dose of it is in the evening after I've had dinner. So I do it twice a day. And definitely, I mean, if somebody comes to me and they say, John, it's my husband, my wife, my mother, whatever, like, I will say, well, here's exactly how we did it in the study. If you want to follow that protocol, that's what we validated. But I can tell you anecdotally over a decade at this, post-academics, that definitely 2 times a day is fine. I mean, we kind of looked at it like, sort of splitting nutrition up a little bit throughout the day. That way it's not all just at one time. Like I wouldn't say take all 4 doses at once. I mean, unless that's just the only way you can do it, okay, fine. But I think the better strategy is to kind of spread it out a bit over the waking period. So like twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day. I mean, most people just don't want to be bothered with such a very rigorous schedule. So I typically just recommend it to people twice a day, and that's what I do. So,
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you start looking at these things, and the questions come to mind of like, okay, if we're seeing this inflammatory reduction, if we're seeing this immune activation, immune probably balancing is a better term for that. We're seeing this kind of, adult stem cell activation. Where do we start this? Like if I read this and I'm like, okay, this goes to like future research questions, right? Like if you know that you have a genetic test that says that, you have an ApoE4, like, okay, let me start being aggressive. For everybody listening, if you haven't tuned in a lot, we've talked about it a decent amount on the show, but that is your risk for Alzheimer's. It's a genetic test for that. Then I need to be a bit more aggressive. Like, when do we start doing this? If you have a family history, is this something that you start early in life and it slows the development of some of these symptoms? I know that we have research on that, but I'm sure y'all have at least looked at and like that, and I'm sure in your dream world you'd be like, hey, I've got a double blind 50-year study on it. But
I wish I did. I mean, to your point, for example, I think one of the paths you're kind of walking down a little bit is prevention, right? Like, generically speaking, you're talking about prevention, especially if you have the mutations for the ApoE4. But I mean, I started our children. We have she's going to be 6 in March, our daughter, and our son is 15 months. I started both of them on this formula. It's around 6 months of age. I just look at these things as such powerful tools in your toolbox. They're not that expensive. I mean, we're not charging people an arm and a leg for what we're selling. We want to make it as available to as many people as possible. So I just look at these things as such potent, powerful tools in your toolbox, to your point, immune balance, immunomodulation, immune support, whatever term you like to use. To me, the immune system is just so crucial to everything that creates optimal health or not. And if your immune system is not modulated properly, how in the world do you expect your central nervous system, your cardiovascular system, all the other major organ systems to be functioning optimally? I don't think they will. So for me, yes, I mean, I wish I had, Warren Buffett's money or somebody that kind of money that I had access to, because I would have already been running other clinical trials to continue answering questions and these theories that Reg and I have that we see anecdotally. We just don't have, data from a clinical trial to say, yes, here, look at this. So,
all right, listeners, somebody's got to be. What's like the what is it? The third year, whatever. Somebody's got to be in connection. Let's. That's
right.
Let's go to the MS study, Doc. Well, go ahead and give us kind of a little breakdown on
Sure.
the group that y'all pulled in for the MS study.
So in the MS study, we had relapsing remitting. We felt like that was the type of MS that would best respond to this for whatever reason based on our previous work. Again, very similar study design, 1-year intervention. Obviously, folks with MS don't have necessarily the same level of cognitive impairment as people with Alzheimer's and dementia. It's more of a physical functioning as opposed to a cognitive functioning issue. So obviously we changed a bit, but we still assessed them at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12. And then we drew blood once again at baseline in 12 months. So almost the exact same panel, not host of biomarkers that we looked at in the Alzheimer's study. We also looked at the MS study. So again, it was a very similar design.
The results are when you compare the two different diseases and like what they did in each disease. Tell us about that.
It's very fascinating. So for example, I didn't have any real prior experience with MS. Not that I had so much with dementia either. I had a little bit of experience in that world, but I didn't know at the time until we started getting into the nuts and bolts of the study that people with MS, the leading cause of mortality is actually infection, not demyelination of the central nervous system. And that was like, wow, I didn't know that. That's very fascinating. And so what we showed was that the in our study at baseline had 7.9 infections, and then we knocked them all the way down to 2.5 at 12 months. Just an incredible finding. And that actually goes back to a lot of other research, again, looking at these two polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran, showing that they are incredibly anti-infectious. I mean, whether it's virus, bacteria, fungus, whatever it is, these polysaccharides have this incredible capacity to turn, they're essentially like signaling mechanisms to the immune system. So whether they're turning on the natural killer cells, the dendritic cells, the macrophage, whatever the case may be, the cytotoxic cells, they just somehow, the immune system, they just get turned on and they say, yes, we're going to knock out this infection. So that was a really, really finding. And then two other really cool findings on the biomarker side, not the quality of life side yet, but one was epidermal growth factor. So speaking of demyelination, epidermal growth factor is another protein that's looked at in conditions. Guess what that protein also happens to do? It is very important for remyelinating the central nervous system tissue. And that was hugely statistically significant over that 12-month period. And then finally, we looked at one of the subsets that turned out to be statistically significant were the CD95, CD34 cells. So these cells are very fascinating because guess what gene they encode on? The FAS gene, the FAS gene. And at the genetic level, that's kind of similar to CD4-CD8 ratio at the cellular level for overall immune system functioning. So we saw a really nice statistically significant increase at the genetic level in terms of these particular cells and at their overall immune function. So those were just really, really findings. Now, obviously, as I know you know, and I'm probably sure many of your listeners know, MS is kind of like a hybrid disease, right? Like it's not purely neurodegeneration. It's not purely immune dysfunction. It's sort of this weird mixture of the two. So it's kind of a hybrid. that is a bit dissimilar from, say, dementia or Parkinson's, the other major neurodegenerative disorders. But where it really proved out at the clinical or practical level was we used a measure called the FAMS, and that's the Functional Assessment for Multiple Sclerosis. So like the 8S-COG is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, the FAMS is the gold standard for assessing physical functioning with MS. And almost every subscale, I think there were two, one was barely not statistically significant, it was like 0.06 or something. And then there was one subscale that was not statistically significant, but all those others very strongly, significantly, statistically significantly improved over that 12-month period. And then we looked at two different quality of life measures. We looked at a thing called the depression inventory. It's not used for diagnosing depression, but we know that depressive symptomatology is very, very for people with MS. There's a very strong link between having MS and mood disorder. And then we had this homemade scale in the clinic where we looked at symptomatology based on basically every major organ system. And all those, again, wildly statistically significantly improved across that 12-month period. So we just had such really nice, let's call them collaborative and complementary findings between the two different studies. I mean, really just kind of, almost walking like hand in hand down the path. And then the last thing that was really cool that I'll mention that, again, kind of overlaps for both studies is we looked at the Th1 to Th2 ratio in both of these groups of data. In the case of the Alzheimer's, that had actually never been published before. Like I was thinking about this paper, we had written a review paper looking at different inflammatory markers in response to vitamin D, I think it was. And in one of those papers, somebody had referred to something called the inflammatory index, which was a homemade thing that they came up with. And then they were relating that to the Th1 to Th2 ratio. And it gave me an idea. I'm like, oh, cool. I didn't even think of that before. So when I write a paper, the first thing I like to do is I go to PubMed, I do my own homework, I see what's been published before or not. In this case, there had never been one paper in people with Alzheimer's disease characterizing the Th1 to Th2 ratio, which I found just bizarre. Like I was surprised I couldn't find anything on
like there wasn't a baseline to it that we know of, like, hey, here's what it typically looks like in an Alzheimer's case.
Not now. I mean, you can now with our data, but before that, no, there was nothing out there. It was fascinating that there was nothing published before. And so it was like this great opportunity for us to be the first people to actually publish this. And so we also had, from another clinical trial, the exact same set of cytokines and growth factors that I could in healthy people who didn't have any known active disease. So it was a great opportunity to not only look at what happened over the 12-month period in our Alzheimer's study, but also to compare them at baseline with the healthy people. So that's exactly what we did. We calculated 6 different ratios. By the way, Th1 is generically pro-inflammatory and Th2 is generically anti-inflammatory. So ideally, you'd want to have some balance there. So when we looked at the data in the Alzheimer's study, all 6 ratios were wildly Th1 dominant. I mean, just very, very big numbers. And then you look at the healthy people and they're all like very close to 1, maybe a little bit. I think a couple of them were around 2, and then a couple of them were below 1, but very, very close to unity. And then over the 12-month period, 5 of the 6 ratios, they didn't get anywhere near to unity, but let's call them less Th1 dominant. And those were 2 of those were statistically significant. They probably would have been had we had a larger sample size. And then the really cool finding was that as they got less Th1 dominant, guess what happened to their cognitive functioning? It improved. So it was a really cool finding to say, okay, here for the first time, we're characterizing these ratios in people with Alzheimer's. And then as we rebalance those values, cognitive functioning improves. So it was a really, really finding. And that paper was our 4th paper from the Alzheimer's study. And then on the MS study side, there had been a couple of other papers that had previously characterized Th1 to Th2 in people with MS, but they were looking at drugs and, the relationship, kind of like more of like prevalence type data rather than response to clinical trial data. So our study, again, was the first one looking at how Th1 to Th2 changed over a 12-month intervention with a dietary supplement. Well, this time the data were completely different. Now you had 4 of the 6 values looking very close to the healthy people. So their data were actually very similar, again, to what, again, normal healthy people look like. And then over that 12-month period, guess what happened? They got way more pro-inflammatory, way more Th1 dominant. But if you circle that all the way back to my first comment about infections, it made perfect sense. We took those we took those infections down. So what happens when the body gets infected? Inflammation goes up. It made perfect sense. And then as those signals went pro-inflammatory, they got better improvement in their quality of life measures. It couldn't have been, we couldn't have scripted it out any better than that. It made perfect sense. So
it's fascinating when you look at that part, because you're like, okay, is this immunosuppressant, or is this like immunorestorative?
Right. Or adaptogenic.
Right. Like you get the difference in those two different diseases and what's happening, and it's always fascinating when you have the same thing that does something different, because this kind of goes to like our earlier conversation of like what is actually going on here. And it's like, is it just normalizing what the body needs in this at hand? If it needs to go down, it's going down. If it needs to go up, it goes up. That's a very interesting change that kind of shows you that it's not the medical, like, direct, here's the exact change that we're telling the body. We're kind of saying, here, you figure out what to do. Does that sound right?
I love it. And to your point about how the body adapts to its environment, depending on what you expose it to or what you introduce to it, I have started in the last couple of years calling these polysaccharides adaptogens, because that's exactly, to your exact point, that's what is happening. It's the body is responding in these very significant disease states, these health challenges, and you give it these materials that it says, wow, this is now the information that I needed that I didn't get before to help me function properly. So it's really correct. It's like, okay, you're too much of this or you're too little of that. So let me respond to that, because now I have the information to be able to do that.
This might be a little bit weird. What's in the gut whenever people are taking this?
Great question. There was a nice review paper published. I forget if that was, because it's now turned 26. I'm a little bit thinking about, that was last year, but no, that was actually 24. So I don't remember if it was 24 or 25, but it was a really nice paper that was talking about all the different prebiotic effects of these polysaccharides. So I think there's a very significant component to gut modulation as well, because of all these different prebiotic properties that these polysaccharides have, in addition to all their other amazing effects.
For in MS, let's talk about like what that means for like their kind of day-to-day life, some of the improvements there. Like what would that have looked like to someone who was in the study, like from where they were at progression function at the beginning to like what their quality of life progression and function at the end would have looked like?
So I can tell you right off the bat, a few of these people were pretty much wheelchair bound, and by the end they were getting out of their chair and actually doing things again. So imagine going from being so weak and so dysfunctional that you're basically just sitting around in a wheelchair all day, to now being able to actually get out and go to the toilet by yourself, take a shower by yourself, actually do things that you and I just take for granted because that's part of what we do every day. But to be that level, to have that level of functionality again was restored. And then I mentioned mood disorder. A lot of these people, as you can imagine, you go from being a normal functioning person to now you're weak and you can't do anything. So you get depressed, you get anxious, you have bipolarism, major depressive disorder. So all those kinds of symptoms get relieved. And then of course you have the social issues, just dealing with social interactions, social relationships, those kinds of things get better because you're no longer depressed, because you're no longer anxious, because you can now take care of yourself and you don't have to have like a caregiver watching you, and you can actually interact with people on a more favorable and level. So there were lots of practical issues, to your point, or practical, let's call them characteristics, not issues, that improved over that 12-month period.
I love it. When you're looking at the like polysaccharide or the complex there, a couple questions with that. Like, can we overdo that? What would happen if you do? Is there any things that come to mind in terms of studies that, like, is there a top end where we start to see some negatives or any side effects to that?
Great question. So I can count on now two hands, and remember, I've been at this for close to 20 years now, either in the academic world or in the business world, where there have been a few cases of people that had, I refer to these as Herxheimer reactions, like a type of healing effect that people didn't like. So that usually involves a loose stool. And because we have some very potent detoxifiers in this formula, like the Ultraterra clay, it's a montmorillonite clay from Mississippi that is just loaded with all of these chelating materials that helps to pull out, whether it's arsenic, heavy metals, PCBs, PHAs, all this crap that's in the environment today that's polluting our bodies. So in addition to that, it's got the NAC, the IP6, the citric acid. Again, these are other chelators as well. They're not necessarily as potent as the clay. But I always tell people, look, if you took, let's say, 2 scoops of the powder per day and you got that reaction and you didn't like it, then be gentle with yourself. Cut it down to like a half scoop per day. And then just slowly build your way up over time. But those reactions have been so far and so few between that it's almost unheard of. Now, I've had people with very late stage, like 4-something cancers that I've put on 12 scoops of the powder per day. They did not have any kind of reaction like that. They responded just fine. I've actually, the can of the powder is 150 grams. I've actually taken a whole can in one day. I just wanted to see for myself if it caused me to have, diarrhea or loose stool or anything. I didn't have anything, but I've been taking this stuff a long time, so I'm
your
sure
body kind of knows what to do with it.
Exactly. But again, the you might refer to as an adverse reaction are so few and far between, which is great because I'm sure there are some rare cases out there of people who do have a legitimate allergy or sensitivity. Maybe not every single one of those people, had a Herxheimer reaction, but I think for the most part, because of the type of reaction that they report of having this loose stool, to me, that's a detoxing effect.
Yeah, we talked pretty recently on the podcast about some of the studies that came out on Alzheimer's brains and glutathione levels, being significantly low. And it's like, okay, this is kind of where the thing is like, okay, well, let's raise the levels. The research brain is like, wait, but was this chicken or egg? Like, was it low and that allowed, the to continue to accumulate? Or was it kind of getting used up because the body was trying to kind of keep that clean, so to speak?
Sure.
You look at y'all's kind of adding the NAC and stuff in there. You're kind of checking that box a little bit to give the body the ability to die, which is always interesting to see somebody go through that, and you almost have to get a little bit worse before you get better as your body kind of gets rid of all of that.
Like, don't look at this as an adverse reaction. Look at this as your body's positive response to the formula to help clean and cleanse itself.
Yeah. Slow it down a little bit and let your body kind of get the change and then go back. Let's talk about cancer a little bit with this. I'll view my current state of looking at this. I've studied polysaccharides in cancer for animals quite a bit. I have a golden retriever who we found out fairly recently has histiocytic sarcoma. Some crazy form of sarcoma. And there's decent studies on polysaccharides from like a mushroom origin. And so we've been putting him on some of those things. And there's great double-blind studies on it that show, slowed tumor growth and cell death and some of those things. So look at this effects in cancer and is from like the cancer cell stuff. What's going on there?
Well, we in one of our healthy adult studies, we looked at natural killer cell cytotoxicity, and it just went through the roof. It was a short study. It was only for 60 days, but that first week we collected at baseline 48 hours in 1 week, and we had this huge ramp up in the cytotoxicity of our natural killer cells in that study. And then from other studies, it really validated or was consistent with, again, looking at what's going on between the natural killer cells, the dendritic cells, and the macrophage, and then maybe a little bit on the Treg level as well. But I think the main action there is the natural killer cells. And then, of course, balancing the inflammation at the same time, or reducing the inflammation at the same time, and just the overall modulation of the immune system, whether you're looking at that, again, that CD4, CD8 ratio, or even a couple of the other indicators that we've looked at over time. But I think there's a whole host of things going on over there with her, and that's the reason why consistently in both animal and in human studies, there have been just some really incredible findings. I mean, I've had just individually, and again, I would be respectful of, FTC compliance and language. I don't want people to again, going down this road of treating disease with nutrition, but I've just seen some let's just say it this way. I've just seen some incredible responses to people with really serious cancer, and then end up basically being fine.
Interesting. I wonder what the effect would be with that. Like if somebody is coming at this from say the mushroom polysaccharide angle, do you know of any negatives offhand of does that increase stress on any organs if you were like, I'm putting both of these polysaccharides together?
I am not. I mean, again, based on the doses that a lot of people that I'm familiar with, that I know of, have taken, I just don't see any long-term issue with it. I mean, whether you look at it from, like liver enzymes or kidney function, I haven't seen anything that would suggest, oh, well, wait a minute here, that we might want to be cautious. I haven't seen any data like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Do get added to your experiment list.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It brings me to the stacking conversation and a little bit of like future study questions. It's like, if we're looking at this from any of these angles, if we're looking at this from a brain health, whether that is to slow the progression, or, hey, I'm trying to prevent, Alzheimer's, dementia, neurodegeneration, what things come off of top of mind that you would stack with this that might enhance the benefits?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because in addition to this product, we also have 3 others that and I've already mentioned one of them, that I think are so crucial to this story. The first one, curcumin. Again, curcumin is just incredible. I mean, look at all the thousands of articles that have been published on it over the last several decades. It's just got such incredible effects. In addition to the brain, the story as well with curcumin. The other big one that I think people are totally undervaluing for brain health, they think of it as more of a cardiovascular effect, is actually EGCG, the or polyphenol from green tea. That's also incredible. And then, of course, your combination of vitamins D3 and K2. K2, not so much from the brain health perspective, but more of that complementary effect for calcium, getting it into the bones. But definitely, as you know, I mean, I think it's something like, well, we published a study, we did a trial in vitamin D a few years ago, and at that time, it was something like 70% of Americans are either insufficient or deficient in their serum vitamin D levels. So not only is it important, obviously, for our bones, but I think it interacts with something like 4,500 genes now that's been shown. And so it's head to toe, right? I mean, it's not just about the bones, it's about every organ. So if you're running around with a vitamin D level of, 20 or 25 or 30, man, you're way too low. And so what is that doing to your brain health, your immune health, your heart health, everything else besides your bones? So I would put those 3 at the top, and I have actually, as from a business model perspective, as complementary or nutrients that would go along with the polysaccharides in daily brain care.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, we're always looking at, certainly in our patients, it's like, how can we address this from like a nutritional standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, from an activity standpoint? And it's like, okay, you might not need all 3, but you probably need 2 out of 3 to make big changes. If you're If you're getting a lot of this from the diet, then you could probably add some supplementation. If you're not going to add supplementation, you probably need to add some activity modification stuff that's adding things to your life and doing that. So I think you need at least 2 out of the 3 to make changes in a certain area. When we go forward, like what would be the studies if we're kind of taking what y'all have currently done and you're like, this would be really good to know?
Oh, wow. We have it designed. It's only in the realm of, well, depending on how many, what the numbers would be, but in terms of the outcomes or the effects or assessments, we would definitely want to add in microbiome testing, right? I mean, that's a no-brainer, no pun intended. We definitely want to look at what's going on in the gut. We certainly want to look at genetic expression. That's obviously a very important and interesting component to all of this. And then certainly we want to look at morphology. We want to have, whether it's, I'm not too much of an imaging expert or know too much about imaging, but whether it's a CT scan or an MRI or CAT scan, whatever the case may be. And then even adding in maybe cerebrospinal fluid. I mean, there are lots of different other outcomes, or not outcomes, but assessments, biomarkers that to be added into this to get a more definitive picture of how these incredible nutrients are having such a significant impact on brain health. But it would be so fascinating to combine all that information together in one study and then really get to some of these more mechanistic issues or questions. The other thing is definitely, I didn't mention it before, like, and you may have thought of this or wondered, why were these Alzheimer's patients so Th1 dominant? My theory behind that is they probably had infections. We didn't collect, unlike in the MS study, we did collect infection data. In the Alzheimer's study, we did not. So did they have herpes? Did they have hepatitis? Did they have, some of these other things that are so common? I'm sure they had cytomegalovirus. We all have that crap. But what were these other infections, or how do you explain that Th1 dominance? And I really feel like some of that could have been explained by infections that we didn't collect in that study. So there are just a whole host of other biomarkers and outcomes that I want to collect in the next study. And I won't even say if, because that's not giving the universe, the proper talk. I want to say when we have that money, that's the next study we're going to run.
For the healthy population with this, I mean, it's like everything that I've looked at, it's like, by and large, the vast majority of people, this is a healthy thing to add in. What are the changes other than prevention? Are there things that happen when someone starts adding this to their kind of repertoire? What other changes? Like what if it's anecdotal? What are the things that seem to be the initial changes that people feel with that?
So without question, one of the biggest things that people have, going back to this prebiotic mechanism, is that, and as well as I do, if not better, there are millions of people running around today with all sorts of different types of GI issues. They start pooping better. People have, whether it's constipation or diarrhea or, this ongoing just kind of general IBS upset issue, seemingly not digesting their food well, they suddenly start having all those symptoms go away. They start pooping better. So that's just a huge one. I mean, that's very important. Another really big one is that people start sleeping better. And again, we know that there are millions of Americans that have insomnia or different forms of disrupted sleep, which is literally killing you over time. And so people start sleeping better. People notice that they generally have more energy, like they just feel, they wake up and they don't have like this sluggishness, like it takes them, an hour or two to kind of get into the zone. No, they wake up and they're ready for their day and just go forward. So energy, focus, your ability to like just have general better wellness, health orientation, if you will, is better throughout the day. For me, I don't have any, literally post-exercise soreness. I mean, if I do something exotic or something that's not in my normal routine, and maybe I stimulate some muscles that don't normally get stimulated, then I might feel a little bit of soreness from that. But in general, I don't have post-exercise training soreness. I just have it. So I know that it's not only just how trained I am, but it's also a function of how these things keep my inflammation just at a very minimal level. I think, another interesting study that I would love to run at some point is ADD and ADHD in children. We definitely have people who've put their kids on these formula, and then their ADD, ADHD symptoms calm down as well. So that's definitely another one where, people that are just so hyperactive and they can't focus and they're just so easily distracted, that also improves for them. I mean, there are just so many things, hair, nails, and skin. I mean, a lot of people say, wow, my skin feels better, it looks more supple, it feels better. Or they start having hair growth on their head again, or their nails. Like, I clip my nails like once or twice a week. My nails grow so fast, it's ridiculous. So there are just literally untold numbers of that people might experience.
Yeah, you're the overall. I mean, this is what we've talked about. Most of this is you're getting the overall system working better, so you can kind of let that infiltrate, every little area. If me and you have a conversation, and I would like to, I'm going to tell this to put this on, in 5 years from now, like what has to happen for this to, like, y'all feel like, okay, we're this into something that actually is a like breakthrough for our rather than like, oh yeah, that was kind of an interesting for a while. Like what?
Yeah, we've got to connect with somebody either in the political realm, which obviously is just. I heard Tim Burchett, one of the congressmen, say the other day, DC's not a swamp, it's a sewer. Swamp was made by God, sewers are made by man. And I thought that was an interesting way of what Washington, D.C. is. But nonetheless, without some sort of a political type connection, which ideally, if we could, would be either through like the VA. I mean, I know we could do a lot to help veterans with, blast issues from, being in action. So they have TBI or concussion syndrome. So some entryway into like the VA system to really help our veterans and our military people. Or on the other hand, it could be like maybe somebody in sports, preferably a football player who's had CTE or also concussion syndrome. We get him helped, and then he, slowly starts sharing it with his friends, and then maybe we get either the NFL or the NCAA, some really big group to like sponsor some research and help us get it to a more national level. I mean, as much as all those things can be challenging to break into, if we can break into one of those roads, then to me, that's where we could really just help literally millions of people.
I love it. Doc, where can people find more about you, more about y'all's compounds, more about the research? Where would we direct people listening to this?
So our primary website is drlewisnutrition.com. That's our brand name. It's loaded with information. It's got all sorts of testimonials, product reviews, summaries of the research. Of course, I don't post the actual articles to not violate copyright, but if people are interested, then I will help them with any questions they have. But it's everything about daily brain care, the flagship product that came out of all of this research on Alzheimer's and MS. And it's really my life story. I mean, this is my life's work. This was not an idea that I had in the shower one night to make a buck. This is 20 years of my life. I call daily brain care my inanimate baby. And I'm just very proud of all of this work that, my colleagues and I have done to create this and share this message with the world. Of course, you can find us on all the typical social media channels under the same Dr. Lewis Nutrition handle, and people can contact us. We have obviously a phone number, email address, messaging. So I'm just trying to help people. And I mentioned millions of people. My goal in business in Dr. Lewis Nutrition is to touch 1 million lives. I know that sounds like a lot of people, but in a world of over 8 billion going on 9 billion, 1 million is really not that many. And I'm going to it. It's tough being in the business world. We didn't even talk about that little part of my life's journey, but being in academics was tough, but being in business is just as tough, and trying to figure out, how to market and get the word out and connect with people. But I'm so grateful for the conversation you and I have had today, and the opportunity for you to allow me to share this message with you and your listeners. And again, I'm just trying to be a beacon in an otherwise difficult world. And I know what they've done for my own life and my family and so many other people that I've had the fortune and to work with and see what things can do, what these polysaccharides can do. So that's my mission, my obsession. I'll do this till my last breath.
Well, from a point of view, I think especially with AI and all that stuff coming, we're as humans really our ability to recognize intent. I think intent and honesty, passion, and like from my standpoint, I'm like, just for y'all, it's like continue telling the story, because the intent behind it and the passion that you have for this definitely comes through, and that's a whole lot different than somebody who's jumping on and saying like, oh, this is an easy way for us to build a business to make money. Not that those don't work. I'm sure they work for a little while, but the lasting presence of them is a lot different. It's like the old, like, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it kind of idea. I appreciate you for this topic and taking the time to do these things and get this information out there. My family's been touched by Alzheimer's. We have lots of family members who've been touched by, secondary family that's been touched by MS. So this is one of those topics that, even if it gives people a little bit of control that they can start to use to kind of create that compounding effect talked about, where you're like, I'm feeling a bit better, so that allows me to do a little more, and that allows me to go and do this thing, and you just start to kind of stack those wins up and get into that compounding effect. I think that's very powerful for people in these situations where they're like, they kind of feel like they have the control. I feel like you see that in Alzheimer's, MS, you see that in cancer a lot, where people are like, I need something that gives me control back, that I can command this environment that is seemingly kind of going off and doing something that we don't want. So right. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Very well said. And I'm sorry your family's gone through all that, but I'd love to work with you guys and see how they would respond to daily brain care, because I think there's a great shot for them to show some.
I love it. Yeah. The starting point might be our dog.
Sure. Absolutely. Definitely.
I love it, John. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much for having me.